Hello, my name's Richard Moore and I'm with Lionel Birnie.
Hello, Richard.
And we are here, Lionel, the 2 out of the 3 of the Telegraph Cycling Podcast in Hemel Hempstead, your patch.
It is my patch, yeah. I went to school here. We're standing in Gaybridge Park where the Tour of Britain finished a little bit earlier this afternoon. Alex Dowsett has taken the yellow jersey after what can only be described, I know it's a cliche, but it was an epic breakaway, wasn't it?
It really was. I think I spotted a little plaque to you on the way into town, Lionel.
The Telegraph Cycling Podcast. Interviews and analysis, we've got the big talking points covered.
We should explain that this is a podcast of two halves. We're going to do a little bit of reflection on today's stage of the Tour of Britain and then finish it off on Sunday in London at the conclusion to the race. So we were on the Tour of Britain today. I was in the MTN-Qhubeka team car with Michal Kwiatkowski, their director sportif. So I'll tell you about that. But I think you were at the finish here, Lionel, and maybe saw a little bit more of the action involving Dowsett.
Yeah, well, I don't live too far from here. I know the local roads very well. In fact,
you landed on them this week, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. A friend and I went out and rode the last 60 kilometres of the course, kind of just from before Chinner Hill, which was one of the categorised climbs. Unfortunately, on the way out, I had a bit of an altercation with the pavement, really. Not entirely sure what happened. Suspicion is that I had a front wheel puncture, and before I knew it, I was on the floor. I'm all right though, Richard. As you've noted, well, I'm soldiering on.
I mean, yeah, you're wearing a bandage on your pinky finger, which, as crash wounds go, isn't up there with the most dramatic I've ever seen.
No, but I took a bit of a beating, really. I'm all bruised down my left-hand side and I've hurt my left knee, but enough of that. I just wanted to follow the actual route that the race was going to take. Well, it started off in Bath this morning and they ended up in Hemel Hempstead, and they came across the Chilterns, through Oxfordshire into Buckinghamshire and then Hertfordshire. Still enjoyed the ride despite my injuries, but I must admit I wasn't expecting the stage today to plan out the way that it actually did, with the 3 riders that got away. There was Matthias Brandle, the I Am rider who won the previous day's stage, Alex Dowsett, who's had a real sort of up and down week. He got into a break earlier in the race, had a double puncture and was in a very unfortunate situation where
he managed to hold it upright, at least, to Lionel, unlike some people. I didn't see any bandage on his pinky finger.
No, that's very true. But in my defence, Alex Dowsett is a professional bike rider, and his handling skills are undoubtedly better than mine. But I think that incident earlier in the week when he punctured first his front wheel, he realised was flat. He got that changed, and then when he got going again, he realised that the rear wheel was also flat. He got that changed, and by that time he was stuck pretty much halfway between the breakaway he'd been in and the bunch, and there was a slightly unfortunate spell where he was trying to chase back on, but as we know in professional cycling, there's a kind of a blind eye usually turned when he would be able to get onto the bumper of the team car and take a bit of a draft, a bit of shelter, and the team car would be able to pace him back up to the break, and that generally is allowed to happen. Unfortunately, because the TV motorbike was on Dowsett filming, they weren't able to do that, and so Dowsett had to kind of go back to the bunch, and he did make the point after that stage that he was pretty angry that the rule wasn't being, or the kind of the slight bend of that rule, which happened for generations since the start of bike racing.
Well, we spoke about a lot in the team car today as we watched numerous riders who'd actually been dropped getting paced back up to the group, and this is a problem. I mean, Dowsett having a puncture like that, or crashing or something from a breakaway, I think it's fair enough that you get paced back up to it. It's like taking a lap out in a track race. You're put back into the race where you had your misfortune. And we watched riders today, I'll not mention any names, but some teams who were chasing were pacing riders who'd been dropped back up to the bunch to enable them to lend their weight to the chase once again, and that could have influenced the outcome of the race. That could have brought the gap down so that Alex Dowsett didn't take the yellow jersey as he did, and that really that's where the commissars should be. Where are they? I mean, there are lots of commissars in the race. Where are they? Why are they not watching this going on at the back? It's a very difficult thing to police, and it's part of the sport. But there are occasions when it's so blatant that really something should be done about it. When the convoy behind the race is quite stretched, and it's stretched partly because some team cars are holding back a little bit and allowing gaps to open it in order them to pace their rider back up to the bunch.
I think the thing is, if this were a race in Europe, perhaps the TV motorbike driver might be a little bit more savvy and might understand perhaps the sport a bit more, and would discreetly get away so that those pictures can't be screened. I mean, the problem is that the organisers and the commissaires and everyone in the race has to protect the image of the race, really, and it doesn't look great if Alex Dowsett is sat 6 inches from the bumper.
I think the integrity of the competition is more important than the image of the race, and what goes on behind the race does actually affect the integrity of the competition.
Absolutely, but in the case of Alex Dowsett's situation, the issue was that the television motorbike was filming and showing live pictures of what was going on, and really that needed to just discreetly get out of the way for 5 minutes so that Alex Dowsett could be paced sort of 3/4 of the way back up to the brake, and then the car pulls out and then Dowsett rejoins the back of the brake. He did admit in his press conference after today that he had been angry about that because of the, as you say, Richard, the double standard that's applied at the front and the rear of the race, and consistency was not really adhered to in this case. However, it's all worked out perfectly for him because he got into that little move, only 3 of them, a long stage, 220 kilometres, the longest stage of the race so far, over deceptively difficult countryside, not flat very much at all today, coming in across the Chilterns, and they built a gap of 9+ minutes, nearly 10 minutes at one stage. And it was really interesting listening to both Matthias Brandle and Alex Dowsett in their press conference afterwards, and we'll play a bit of those a little bit later, but they both made the point that the first sort of hour of racing was incredibly aggressive. Lots and lots of people wanted to get away, and they made the point that the Omega Pharma Quick-Step team had done an awful lot of chasing to try and basically police which riders would get away, and they noticed that they were beginning to tire. This is Brandle and Dowsett noticed that Omega Pharma Quick-Step was starting to tire, and they had a little word with each other and said, right, this is the time to go. And once they got away, true enough, as often happens, the bunch will then allow the gap to be established, perhaps at maybe 4 or 5 minutes, but in this case it got out of hand for them. They were joined by another rider, Thomas Stewart from the Madison Genesis team, who he did a terrific job to hang on to.
Former mountain biker, yeah, who's only started road racing 2012, 24 years old. People have been talking about him a lot this week actually, and he's been pretty active and quite visible this week. Clearly a very good rider. It's interesting that you know, I mean, I was in the team car right from the start, so I saw just how hard the start was, and the riders were all over the place on the first big long climb coming out of Bath. It was very, very hard indeed. And you know, interesting that the Quick-Step showed signs of weakness so early in the stage. It reminds me a little bit of that infamous stage in the Pyrenees the day after Chris Froome took the yellow jersey at the Tour de France, where they were put under pressure the next day very early in the stage, and they tried to control it, and you know, some cracks appeared, and then other teams were very quick to capitalise on that, and it wasn't quite so much the same kind of ganging up that we saw today. But Brandle and Dowsett in particular, 2 extremely strong riders, and Dowsett riding, I think, still on anger, and he said that in the press conference afterwards. There was a real edge to Alex Dowsett talking about the stage. He was very serious. He wouldn't answer a question about what's going on with his contract negotiations, because he is out of contract at the end of this year. I mean, this week, his performances this week certainly won't be doing him any harm whatsoever. I think we're here now, Lionel, from Brandle and Dowsett, both of whom talking a bit about Friday's stage and how it unfolded, and Dowsett talking about the deal that he made with Brandle.
It was a hard first 50k, and I was on the attack, but then it was getting really hard, so I decided to rein it in a little bit and just follow. And then Matthias came up to me and said, I think Quick-Step are on their limit at the moment, so it was a little bit crosswindy, so I just had a bit of speed, went down the inside, and sort of chinned off with Matthias and Tom from Madison. And then we got away, and when we started plugging away into the headwind, I sort of thought, Alex, this is probably not your wisest of moves here. considering it was headwind all day and really like not as hard a finish as we've been experiencing in the last few days. So kind of thought it'd just be a simple like quick step, would let us go out, bring us back. And then when it kind of got up round, I really went flat out for the first sort of 40k that we were away, just to establish a good gap. So I knew that everyone would be relaxing a bit behind. And then Van Baarle came up and just said, you know, let's take it a little bit easy. So for about 20k, I think I then knocked it off a little bit. But then, the gap then grew up to, I think it was like 9 minutes 10 we had at one point. So then kind of started thinking less about the stage win and more about the general. So from probably the last 100k I was more or less flat out.
And I mean, it was an incredible effort. I mean, did it not start to pay at some point? You must have felt it coming in the last 20-30 k's or so.
Yeah, I think I've eaten more gels today than I have in my whole lifetime. I really suffered for that today. I would say that's probably one of the hardest days I've had on the bike, if not the hardest. But it was great. Like Matthias was giving me a huge amount of help, and we agreed that because there was a good chance of me getting into yellow that he'd take the stage win. With how nailed I was at the finish, I don't even think I could have contested for the stage win. And Tom gave us as much as he could, which we're both super grateful for. And it's just running on adrenaline at the end now. But
you're also obviously in great form, and I think you said earlier this week you think you're in the best form of your life. Is that something that you obviously feel even more now? And where do you go from here in terms of looking ahead to the World Championships and so on? Yeah,
I'm going well here. I'm climbing a lot better than I have done historically. I think I changed my training a lot in the last... since Commonwealth Games, I did Eneco Tour. It was quite clear I was lacking top end, so that's all I've been working on since commies. So it's clearly paid off more so than I thought.
I knew if it's coming to a sprint, I just have to stay on the wheel of Dowsett and go with 200 meters to go, and that's what I did.
Did you speak to Alex Dowsett about that? Because clearly he was going for the yellow jersey, you were going for the stage win. So did you speak to him about that stuff?
Yeah, we were talking. We are not attacking. We have to go like a team time trial in 3. We said we are not attacking. Yeah. We're going to go together to the line. In the finish, I told him I'm not going now full. You have to go full if you want to go for the yellow jersey. And in the final, I had a little bit more to do the sprint there.
And you mentioned that you spoke to him before you even attacked. You realised it was a good time to attack. Had he been quite aggressive in the early part of the stage as well? Was it obvious that he was trying to get away?
Yeah, he was the last days. You can feel he really wants to do something here. It's his home race. It's a Tour of Britain. And I knew he's strong. I saw it in the last days. And sometimes today I just had the feeling now you have to move. And then
why did you want to get in the break? Because you won your stage yesterday. Why did you want to? Do you not just want to take it easy today? Did you?
It was also a little bit a part of the tactic of the team. We want to have a hard race, and for a hard race we need to have a strong breakaway. And it's better if you have one rider in the front, because if there is no Yama in the front today, we also have to chase behind, and it's easier to chase in the front and behind.
Were you surprised that they did let you get such a big lead, and that they seemed to leave it too late to start chasing?
I was really surprised. I was like, okay, maybe they give us 4 or 5 minutes and it will be really a hard fight in the end, but they give us 9 minutes with Alex and me in the front, and okay, that's well, I don't know what you're thinking, but I think our chances are growing every kilometre.
So that was a stage winner in Hemel Hempstead, Matthias Brandle. That was his second consecutive stage win of this Tour of Britain. Alex Dowsett, who's taken the yellow jersey, with two days still remaining, 3 stages still remaining, has to be the hot favourite to win the Tour of Britain now, and we'll obviously be in London reporting on that a little later in the show. One thing on Omega Pharma Quickstep, I had a quick chat with Brian Holm, who's their sports director, in the car today behind the bunch, and he was a little bit downbeat that they hadn't managed to hold it together. He didn't make any excuses. I asked whether having such a small team in a race like this, where basically only 6 riders, which limits the number of people that you can commit to the chase. Particularly, they thought if it came back together for a sprint, they'd want to leave Mark Cavendish as fresh as possible. As it was, Mark Cavendish was doing some of the pace setting on the front of the bunch over the final couple of climbs, and then Kwiatkowski himself, the former race leader, was working on the front on the run-in. I mean, they really used up everything they possibly had, and Brian did say, you know, if we're going to go down, we'll die with our boots on.
I wondered about Cavendish. I was being in the car following. You don't see a lot of what goes on, and it can be quite hard to know exactly what's going on. But we did see Renshaw and Nicky Terpstra both dropped, not early, but inside the last 25 kilometres. So they'd obviously been working hard. The fact that Cavendish was still there suggested that maybe they were hedging their bets a bit and keeping him as a sort of plan B. And I gather he was very strong in the finale. Again, it's interesting. Kittel was one of the very, very first guys dropped on the climb coming out of Bath, and so as soon as it gets hard like it was today, Kittel's out of the picture really. So there was every reason to, keep Cavendish in reserve and hope that it all kind of fell perfectly on a plate for them, with Kwiatkowski keeping the yellow jersey and Cavendish winning the sprint. But as you say, with a 6-man team, it's very hard to get all those ducks to line up, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and Brian did say, it's easy in a race like this to get a little bit greedy. They had the stage win with Mark Renshaw, then they have the yellow jersey with Kwiatkowski, and then they had the opportunity to really do everything today. They could have won the stage and kept the yellow jersey, and in the end they did neither. But it was an absolutely fantastic day's racing. I mean, I was stood here at the finish line watching on the big screen. Huge crowds. Never really expected to see crowds as big as this in a town where when I grew up and did a lot of cycling, it was a real kind of solitary kind of experience really. It wasn't like cycling was particularly popular. We're here a good 2.5 hours after the stage is finished. There's loads of kids still riding around. It's been a fantastic atmosphere.
Absolutely, Lionel. We're being called to go and speak to Three Counties Radio. Let's take a little pause there, and then we'll come back and we will I'll tell you a little bit about my day in the team car and play a bit of my interview with Michal Kwiatkowski from the car.
You're listening to the Telegraph Cycling Podcast. Tweet us at cycling_podcast.
So, Richard, we've just been on BBC Radio there talking about the Tour of Britain today. Perhaps now you can tell us a little bit about your day. You were in the MTN-Qhubeka team car. I've been in team cars before, and you're never quite sure what you're going to get. So how was your day following the peloton?
You mean in terms of sandwich filling?
Well, you did say you declined your sandwich.
I did, actually. Yeah, you always get offered a sandwich, which was very, very nice of teams. But yeah, I was with Michal Kwiatkowski, who's an old Dutch pro from the late 80s and 90s. He rode for Panasonic, TVM, so he rode under some of the sort of the world's most admired directors sportifs. He rode under Peter Poss, who he doesn't rate at all, actually. He didn't rate at all as a director, and Jan Raas, who he did. So he had a lot of stories about those days. I spoke to him for the podcast, and we'll hear a little bit about how the day went. They lost Linus Gerdemann today, their former Tour de France yellow jersey wearer. He had a knee problem, so he pulled out. So you'll hear a little bit about how the day unfolded for MTN-Qhubeka. Also spoke a bit about how that team is really stepping up next year. They've signed, Edvald Boasson-Hagen, Theo Bos, Tyler Farrar, all very fast riders who could win races. So interesting to see what sort of direction they're going in next season. It wasn't a hugely eventful day for them from a racing point of view. The team is a curious mix of the likes of Gerdemann and then younger, more inexperienced riders, including a stagiaire, in fact. And he said that the big challenge with those guys is really instilling in them the confidence, the belief that they can do something in this race, that they can compete. He kept describing them as being very shy, and he's certainly not, Michel. So he was really using his big personality to try and get them to believe in themselves a little bit more and be a bit more aggressive in the racing as well. So we'll hear a bit about that. But I'd say not a hugely eventful day, and without the radio connection to the riders, which DSs don't have on this race, not an awful lot he can do to influence the racing or to give instructions to his riders. But nevertheless, you do always get an interesting angle on the race from behind. I didn't see the break. go. I didn't see what was happening at the front of the race, but at the back you can see riders coming and going, collecting bottles. I call it the engine room, and there's an awful lot that goes on there. An awful lot happens. I mentioned earlier the cheating that goes on at the back with riders, and the World Tour teams were the worst offenders for having riders sit right behind the car, riders who had been dropped. And it was interesting to see. Peter Velits, who I think was in the break a couple of days ago, was one of the first guys dropped today as well. And that you wouldn't expect that. BMC had a bad day. Belkin were not good either. A lot of their riders dropped early. So it was very interesting just to see the sort of level playing field in a way between some of those riders on World Tour teams up against riders on lesser teams supposedly.
It can be chaotic back there, can't it? You see riders dropping back to collect bottles, or they've got problems with their bikes, or you really are. You call it the engine room, and that's a very good description of what goes on there. I remember being in a team car. I think it would have been at Gent-Wevelgem, and just thinking all the time, oh well, it will settle down in a minute. It will settle down in a minute, as if there's ever a phase of the race where there isn't that activity going on. And it's quite a shock when you are in a team car like that to realise that it's like that for 4.5 hours all day. Something is going on back at the cars. The drivers, as a passenger, you can sit there and you get out of the car and you feel almost like, the relief that you're out of that car.
Yeah, for the driver especially, he's not just looking on the road ahead of him, he's looking behind him all the time, because there are always riders coming up. And there was one near miss today actually, where the Garmin-Sharp team car, Charly Wegelius was driving it, had pulled to the side of the road for a call of nature. And we were coming up behind it and going around it, and he started pulling out to get in front of us. But Michal didn't want to put the brakes on because he had a rider sitting behind him getting back up to the race. Not one of his own riders, I hasten to add. So he had to keep going even as the cars almost collided with each other, and just hold his nerve until knowing that Charlie would eventually see him, and he did. And stopped, and we got round. But his priority in that case was the safety of the rider behind. And it's a very intense, very draining experience, and particularly hard on these narrow, twisty roads that we have here in the UK, and the race goes along. Anyway, we'll play a little bit of my interview with Michal Kwiatkowski, the director sportif at MTN-Qhubeka. Here he is.
132 kilometers coded, 3 hours, 132 kilometers.
We are every day in the race, and that we are part of the final, try to attack, but we not really have a top sprinter here, so the first stage was difficult. Yesterday we've been in the break with 4, and they make it to the finish. Only our rider was dropped on the last climb, so we are not much lucky so far, but we are still doing every day good finals.
And this is a race where we don't have race radios. Does that make your job as DS harder?
Yeah, when you have the radios, you can support your riders and say this is the moment. And you're not able to do that. So directly to the front, you can do the final.
No, you're in the front. Yeah.
Okay, very good.
You like to encourage them, don't you, and sort of give them sort of positive feedback on how they're riding. Today there was a big split earlier on, and is that something that you miss, that ability to sort of communicate more regularly with them?
Yeah, that's for our team the main problem, that we can support them and learn them more in the race. Now I must say in the evening, and they don't remember the moment, but especially for our team, because we have a lot of unexperienced riders, and they must learn a lot. And you see them making big steps every race, but it can go for us. It can go quicker with radios. But
and you were saying earlier that this is your first year with MTN-Qhubeka. You've been with Dutch teams both as a rider and as a director. And are you noticing sort of cultural differences with some of the South African riders?
The most important thing is that we both like cycling, but in Europe we are a little bit further with the technical things in the races. But the most important is that they are very strong riders from South Africa, and but they must learn a lot about the way how we do the races here in Europe.
And they need to believe also that they can win these races, don't they?
Yeah, sometimes they are a little bit too shy, and I support them to be always in the front. It's every day the same story, but the race happens in the front. And in the beginning they were following a little bit and not be a part of the race, and now day by day in the season they they get more in the front and also be a part in the race, and that's very good.
And I mean, does it need one or two of these riders to start winning big races and to be sort of a role model for some of the other riders? And are there any of the South African riders on the team who you would say that we should look out for?
Yeah, we have a few good riders, like he was in the car, Dennis van Nieuwkerk. We have a few good ones now in the Vuelta. But how the team is going for next year, we have world-class riders like Bo Hagen and Farrar and Theo Bos. They are coming next year to our team. And that can also make them a lot better because now we are more important in the peloton. So they also feel a lot better. If Bo Hagen needs support, they also must be in the front, otherwise they cannot help him. So it makes them also better as a rider when we have those riders in the team.
I must say I haven't heard that pronunciation of Bosenhagen before. Is that a Dutch pronunciation?
Yeah, I have also strange.
As long as he knows that you're talking to.
Yeah.
But you must be very excited about next year with some of those riders that you have signed, Bosenhagen in particular.
Yeah, of course. But it also say about how the riders are thinking about our team. It starts with Siolek. He was coming from a very big team, and he was coming to MTN. They need drinks. This is water for someone else. If you don't want water.
Michal, how are you enjoying being in Great Britain driving on the left?
Yeah, that's a little bit difficult the first few days, but after a few days you get used to it.
And have you found a radio station you like? Yeah, no, you've been on Heart FM and flicking through the channels.
I always like to have a good spirit in the car.
Yeah.
So nice music can be. When the race is exciting, I put it out, but like now it's a little bit, status quo.
Well, there's the three riders, including Alex Dowsett, have a huge gap. Are you surprised the way that the race is going today?
It's, yesterday they give the break not so much space, only 2 minutes or 3 minutes maximum, and there were not the big names. And now there are a few big names in front, and they give them so big space, and also short in classement. I think is 1 minute and 20 behind. And yesterday the shortest was 3 minutes behind, so I don't understand, but they must chase very hard now. So we see if it's going to work.
We were talking earlier about some of the directors that you had as a rider, Jan Raas, Peter Post, some of the real sort of great directors in the history of cycling. Really. What have you who's been the most sort of influential director that you had as a rider, and what have you taken from them into your own job as a director?
Yeah, from the very big teams, I was the most charmed of Jan Raas. But I also learned a lot from Rudy Pevenage, but he was sport director in a smaller team in Belgium. And tactically, I learned a lot from him. But yeah, like Jan Raas, it was one of my best teams I was in.
What made him such a good director, Jan Raas?
First of all, he made a very good, nice atmosphere in the team. Everybody likes each other. It was really a team. And when he was angry at you, it was angry for 5 minutes. And after 10 minutes, we drink, the sports bar, drink a cola, and he was drinking a beer. And then you were friends again. And I miss that sometimes in cycling. When people are angry, they stay angry for 1 year. And that was not with Jan Raas. He say you the truth, and then it was finished, and then you had your new chance.
Was he angry at you much?
No, never. I was perfect.
Then we were back up to the bunch again, this time to give some bottles to Andreas Stumpf, the German rider. Michal was a little alarmed when he saw red liquid streaking his arm.
What happened with your arm? What happened with your arm?
It's beetroot.
Huh?
Beetroot.
Okay, I'll beat this up. Wait.
Turned out it wasn't blood, but beetroot.
Say to Karel he go more to the front, because he's too shy. He stay in the back. Yeah. I know the team is have a lot of ambitions. They were very happy, and they do it, I think, very well in the Vuelta this year. Yeah, and when you did the Vuelta, you always want to do more. So I think it's a good ambition that we want to do maybe next year already the Tour de France. And with those riders, I think it's very good possible.
And you were mentioning earlier, your son Mitchell is promising young rider, so he's racing for Holland at the World Junior Championships coming up.
Yeah, after in 2 weeks, on the Saturday, he's doing the World Championships by the juniors. And I'm also looking forward to that. I'm already a little bit nervous.
Will you be there to see him?
Yeah, I go to Spain, yeah. Hey, yeah? Okay. Shall I ask in the car with Belkin? Is that okay?
What?
We have no place in the car. Shall I ask Belkin? I know the Svanja. Yeah? Okay, we stop them.
We've pulled to the side of the road because Michal has learned that his team captain, Linus Gerdeman, wants to pull out of the race. Gerdeman had come back to the car earlier complaining of pain in his knee. Unfortunately for the German, who is a former yellow jersey wearer at the Tour de France, there is no spare seat in the car. It is filled by the Cycling Podcast. So Michal calls in a favour from his friends at Belkin, asking if they can take Gerdeman. Thankfully, they can. So Michal, you've lost your team captain there, Linus Gerdeman. He came back to the car earlier with a knee problem. I noticed you didn't sort of order him to stay in the race or anything. I guess a guy of that experience, you trust his judgment.
Yeah, the first time he was coming before the feeding, and I say, look how it's going, otherwise you stop in the feeding. But then I was surprised that he was not stopped there, so I had a good hope that he maybe can finish the day. But yeah, then now he stopped a few kilometers ago, and yeah, he said he really had a lot of pain in his knee. So and he's a real professional, so I trust him, and he was also very important for our rider, Karel Nick. So I think he has a good reason to stop the race, otherwise he was not stopped.
And he seemed, when he came back originally, he was checking that he's leaving the team at the end of the year, and I guess there's always a suspicion that riders who are moving on perhaps don't have the same loyalty to the team anymore. But he seemed anxious earlier on to get reassurance from you that he wasn't going to be criticised for pulling out the race. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, he was the first time he was asking that, and but he's a real pro, and he did very professional how he behaved this week here. He works a lot for the team, and I appreciate it a lot. And
because Linus Gerdeman obviously was former yellow jersey wearer at the Tour de France stage winner. Bizarrely had a year out in 2013 when he didn't have a contract, and he returned this year with the team. I know he's had some health problems this year, but and he's moving on. But has he been a good rider for MTN this year?
I think he was important for the team. He did a few good things. It's always nice when you have, like you said, a stage win in the Tour de France. For the riders in this team was very a person to looking for, and he has a lot of experience, so he can also tell in the evening what went wrong, and they believe it. If they only hear it from the sport director, they think blah blah blah. But now they also hear it from him, so in that way he was important for the team. It's also not nice for him that he must stop the race, because then you are 2 days with the team and you're not really a part of it anymore, so it's always better to stay on the bike.
Wise words. Always better to stay on the bike.
Yeah.
He's packed at the right point, I think. This is a nasty little climb we're going up now.
Yeah, but especially on this climbs, he is very important for our young rider Karel, and I think he's with a bad feeling in the car now.
So Karel, can you tell me how you pronounce? He's a Czech rider, a young stagiaire, should turn pro next year. How do you pronounce his surname?
Yeah, this MTM is well a team with a lot of different names, of difficult names. So I call him always Kareltje, because he was a lot in Belgium.
Right.
But I don't know really how his back name, how they say it.
H-N-I-K, Hinnik.
Yeah, Hinnik. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, that's one of the main challenges on a multinational team like this, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's not easy to learn all the names.
Mind you, for us, the Dutch names are among the hardest, I think.
Yeah, but for me, they are the easiest.
So it's what do you call him, Karel?
Yeah, Karel is his name, but we always make it a little bit smaller, Kareltje.
So it's like little Karel.
Yeah, little Karel. Yeah. He's also not so big, but we say it also to Woutje Poels, and he's 2 meters. And directly to the front, eh? You can do the final.
No, we're in the front, yeah.
Okay, very good.
Here Michal is yelling at Van Niekerk, and Van Niekerk is yelling back. It's towards the end of the race, but it's all becoming a bit more fraught and tensions are running high. Again, the main advice is for Nick to move up.
Here.
Give me a real Coke.
A real Coke.
Without caffeine.
Go ahead to the front. And Kareltje there, eh?
Well, Michal, you called it right today. It looks like Alex Dowsett's going to stay away in that 3-man break. You had a feeling. And do you think Omega Pharma maybe messed up a bit today tactically?
Yeah, I cannot understand that they wait so long. They give them almost 10 minutes. And those in the front are not normal boys. They're very strong. Like I see yesterday, they gave a maximum 3 minutes on not so good riders. And I think they make the mistake to give them 10 minutes, but they must be amazing strong in the front.
It's hard with the 6-man teams, I guess, as well.
Yeah, but that makes the cycling so interesting, and I think it's also for the future good that more organizers go with six riders, because they cannot. You see it today; they cannot control it, and that makes cycling interesting.
And another day, your guys are up there. We've obviously lost Linus Gerdeman, but you've got, I think, 4 riders still up in that front group, so they're obviously strong, and you've got another couple of days to try and get something out of the race. Yeah,
now of course the 3 guys stays in the front, but I still have hope that we maybe have one rider in top 10 today. And like I said, I think they did it very good today. It was a very hard race, and they're still there, and we've been a part in the race, so that's good.
Great. Well, I hope when you head back to Europe from the Tour of Britain, you'll adjust again to driving on the right-hand side of the road.
Yeah, normally I go directly from London to Italy to do the races there, and I hope I learn it quickly, because otherwise it's dangerous.
It's going to be a terrible accident. Good luck.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me in the car today, Michal.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you.
The Telegraph Cycling Podcast. Interviews and analysis, we've got the big talking points covered.
So Lionel, we're 2 days on. We've just flashed forward 2 days from the last bit of the podcast, and we're now in London at the finish of the Tour of Britain. I should say at this point that there'll be a second podcast covering the Vuelta. Our colleague, a friend of the podcast, Daniel Frieb, is at the Vuelta at the moment, and he'll be sending a dispatch from that. So stay tuned the next couple of days. There'll be a podcast from the Tour of Spain wrapping that up with some exclusive interviews from there. Hopefully it won't take as long to transmit as his Arctic report, but it should be in the next few days. But we've been watching the Tour of Britain all week, and it's been a terrific race, and we were in central London today for the time trial in the morning and the circuit race in the afternoon. The winner, a surprise, Dylan van Baarle, Garmin-Sharp. I don't think anybody saw that. Certainly we didn't see that on Friday when we talked about Alex Dowsett's great escape and yellow jersey. It looked like he would maybe keep that. He didn't. So, but a great week's racing.
It's been a fantastic week's racing. The yellow jersey had changed hands virtually every day. Only Kwiatkowski and Van Baarle managed to defend it successfully. A slightly surprise winner in Dylan van Baarle, young Dutch rider with the Garmin-Sharp team. We'll find out a little bit more about him shortly. But the thing that characterised the race for me was just how aggressive it was. Every day, attacking racing, very difficult for anyone to defend their position, as we saw with Alex Dowsett on the penultimate day's racing down to Brighton when he had the yellow jersey, and you would have backed his Movistar team to be able to defend that for him, but it was another long stage, the longest of the race. It was aggressive again from the start, and as we'll hear from Charly Wegelius, the Garmin-Sharp sports director, a little bit later, he puts that down to the way the organisers kind of made the first hour of racing difficult, so that aggressive racing was encouraged. It wasn't a case of just letting soft brakes go clear and then just reel it in as a matter of course and then just have a sprint at the end. There was plenty of opportunities for people who wanted to mix it up, and that's exactly what happened. And I don't think on Friday afternoon in Hemel Hempstead either of us would have predicted that Alex Dowsett would lose the yellow jersey on Saturday's stage, but it was just too much for Movistar to try to hold it all together, and in the end the alliance really between Omega Pharma Quickstep and Garmin-Sharp netted a stage win for the Belgian team and the overall for the American team.
Yeah, I mean, we can praise the organisers for the course. We can talk about the roads as being heavy, as Dylan van Baarle mentioned in his post-race interview today. We can also credit the riders with riding the way they did, but we can credit them also with cracking, because that in some ways that made the race. The inability of such a strong team as Omega Pharma Quickstep on Friday to control the race, to the point where in the final sort of 40 minutes we had Kwiatkowski himself in the yellow jersey, the only Omega Pharma Quickstep rider who was able to contribute at that point to the chase, which showed you how hard it had been. And it's very rare that we see that we see these very, very strong teams fall away in the way that we've seen that happen here. Really extraordinary. As we heard earlier in the podcast, I spent Friday in the team car with MTN-Qhubeka and didn't see Alex Dowsett's ride. Obviously heard what was happening. I watched the stage later in the evening, and really an extraordinary performance by Dowsett. He seemed to be on the front a good 60-70% of the entire stage, and it was incredibly impressive, and really no surprise perhaps that he paid for it the next day. Anyway, shall we hear now from Kwiatkowski, who finished second overall, and also the winner, Dylan van Baarle. We'll hear first Kwiatkowski and then Dylan van Baarle. Quite interesting what Kwiatkowski says in defence, I suppose, of his team and their inability to control the race on Friday. And then we'll hear from the winner, the Dutchman, Dylan van Baarle. You had a fantastic start to the season. In the middle you were a little bit tired, I think, at the Tour de France, but you seem to have hit great form again. Are you looking at the World Road Race Championship as one that you might be a serious contender in?
Last year they also said that I will be contender for the for the Worlds, but you know how I end up. I couldn't even finish the race. I'm still 24 years old, and what I can say, for the moment it's all right. Hope these 2 weeks, this 1 week here in Tour of Britain gives me some extra energy, extra condition, and I hope I will be on that day, in great form, in good condition.
Do you know much about the course? Do you know if it's have you looked at the course at all? Do you know if it suits you?
It's a classic, so I made big step forward on classics, and all classics suits me well, and I hope that race will be good, for Polish cycling, because we're gonna have 9 riders. That's I want to say that's because of great success of Rafał Majka and Przemysław Niemiec, and that's amazing that Poland had 9 riders on the World Championship.
When I got 10 minutes, then I started to believe in it, and then Julian Vermoot wasn't riding anymore, and then we went full gas to the finish, and at that point I could believe I could have the yellow jersey, but winning, didn't believe at that moment.
I mean, you're obviously in a good position, but then you've had a good week. It's been a very hard race, so therefore a hard race to win. What's made it so hard? Is it the way the riders have approached each stage? It's been very aggressive. Is it the roads? What the 6-man teams? What do you think?
I think everything, especially the roads are really heavy, and little steep climbs, and but also the 6 men's team. It's really exciting because you saw it also with the stage of Alex Dowsett. They were pulling and pulling, but they didn't catch them, and that was also what I was hoping for yesterday. And
you were inspired by Alex Dowsett's escape.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
And what kind of rider? You're still very young. What kind of rider do you see yourself becoming over the next few years?
I would like to be a classics rider, especially the Flanders and Roubaix, but also this kind of stage races, not too long. I'm not a really Grand Tour rider. I'm a little bit too heavy for it, but you never know.
And are you happy in Garmin-Sharp? Do you enjoy being in part of that team?
Yeah, it's amazing. Like this week, we were a really good team. We were always stayed together and being at the front, and the guys did an amazing job this week, and I'm so happy also for them that I could win this.
Well, now let's hear from Dylan van Baarle, Sports Director Charly Wegelius, who explains a little bit about what kind of rider Van Baarle is and tips him to be somebody who may figure in the classics in years to come. He's that sort of rider. But Charly also talks a little bit about the challenge that all of the teams faced in this Tour of Britain. And actually, after we finished this little bit of interview that you're going to hear, Charly laid a bit of a challenge down to the organiser of the Tour of Britain in future years. He said he would like to have seen a team time trial stage, and that's pretty much the only thing that the Tour of Britain organisers haven't yet thrown into the mix. We've had summit finishes, we've had criteriums, we've had time trials, kind of long and short. Perhaps a team time trial would be an interesting stage to have in future, and the reason he said that was because he said if the Garmin-Sharp team hadn't had to put such a strong team into the Vuelta, ideally he would bring his A team to a race like the Tour of Britain, partly because it's such a great tune-up for the World Championships because of the timing of the race.
That's a good shout. With the team time trial now in the World Championships, it would be perhaps sensible for a stage race to have a team time trial. But I must say, Garmin-Sharp in plea for team time trial shock.
Yeah.
They do like their team time trials, don't they, Garmin-Sharp? It's in their DNA, I think. Anyway, shall we hear from Charly now?
Okay, Charly, it turned out to be an excellent week for Garmin-Sharp this week, but for those of us who perhaps aren't terribly familiar with Dylan van Baarle, what can you tell us about him?
He's 22 years old, very strong rider, won the Olympias Tour last year, extremely strong time trialist, very, very good future waiting for him in the classics, I think. We took him for 14 days to the Giro this year, and he managed incredibly well. He had a crash, and he fell halfway down a mountainside and was covered in mud, and a lot of more experienced riders would be freaking out, and he was really quite calm. And we stopped him after 14 days, but he wasn't really fried, so for a rider of his age, I think it's a really impressive sign.
And in terms of this week, he stayed there or thereabouts and then made the decisive and most important move on Saturday's stage to Brighton. It was a surprise, I think, to those of us watching, thinking that Alex Dowsett perhaps had it wrapped up. And then perhaps the surprise on Saturday was that such a dangerous move went clear again for a second consecutive day. Why did that move work? And was it something that you talked about trying to get somebody away, and Dylan in particular?
Well, we started the race with Dylan and Jack as our priorities, and we realised after the third stage on the tumble that we'd have to move things around a bit to make some progress. And honestly, we realised how hard this race was going to be to control when we tried doing it ourselves. Because when, normally chasing a 4-rider break 80 kilometres from the line, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it's something you can control quite well. And we made a couple of small errors when we had a pause, when we shouldn't have had a pause, and we never caught them again. And, I think, in cycling you don't often see that. So we realised then how tricky it was going to be. And we were hoping to put him in a big move the day that Alex went away, but unfortunately that didn't work out. And we tried again on Saturday, and luckily it worked.
That stage on Friday, the opening 50 kilometres was carnage, really. It took a long time for that break to establish. Really, it only happened once Omega Pharma Quickstep had kind of realised they couldn't contain everything indefinitely. But yesterday's move, Omega Pharma Quickstep got a man into it, having lost the jersey. Yourselves got a man in it. And then did that swing the balance of power in favour of the break simply because it left so few teams capable and motivated to try and contain it?
Yeah, I think that the organisers of the race deserve a lot of credit for having designed such a good course, because the starts of the stages were always hard, so it gives an aggressive race an advantage. 6 rider teams, I think, is an extremely positive development for exciting races. And obviously when you go deep into a race, people are trying to preserve, people are trying to make other people work, and it can get quite tricky quite quickly, and it only takes a moment's hesitation for a quality group to get a good lead, and we saw it twice this week. So I think a lot of organisers could take some hints from that.
On Friday, Alex Dowsett said it was the hardest day he'd had on a bike. Obviously it's an extraordinary break for him to be in. The three of them had to squeeze absolutely everything they had out in order to stay away. Somebody then said this morning that he had the feeling that a lot of riders in the bunch were on their knees. I'm British, this is our home tour. Sometimes we tend to get a little bit carried away in talking things up, but in terms of how hard this is compared to other comparable stage races of a week length, how difficult is it for the riders?
I think it's very tough. English roads are notorious for being dead, so you're working hard, you don't really seem to be making much progress. And I mean, I got dizzy in the car driving around these country lanes for 8 days, so you can just imagine the riders. And you have to remember it's also September, and I think in the peloton here there's quite a large difference between the levels of the very good riders and the ones who are a little bit tired and the ones who aren't used to riding at this level too. So I think it makes for a pretty hard peloton to control.
And lastly, looking at the race as a whole, has anyone stood out for you? Any young riders on your radar? You're quite good at picking out potential talent for the future. Has anyone caught your eye?
Yeah, I think the Irish kid, what's his name? Is it McNally? I think he's ridden really. The whole ANPOS team rode extremely well all the week, but him especially. I think he did. I think he did very well this morning, didn't he? I think was he 8th or 7th or something. It's obviously a good quality rider, but there's plenty of good riders here.
So that was Charly Wegelius, but let's not forget the winner of the time trial stage in London on Sunday morning was Bradley Wiggins. Good to see the national time trial champion winning a time trial on the roads of his home city, really, and he was in quite good form, I gather, afterwards, talking to the media, although one question was very much off limits, wasn't it, Richard? That was the speculation over his plans and what his contract negotiations might mean for next season. If you're listening to the podcast last week or the week before, whenever it was, I forget when it was now, last week, we brought to light the rumours that Bradley Wiggins may well be in line to lead a development squad, perhaps sponsored by 21st Century Fox. I actually called them 20th Century Fox in the podcast last week.
Apparently they changed their name 14 years ago.
They did indeed, yeah. Well, you know, finger on the pulse here. 14 years ago, they became 21st Century Fox. They're one of.
I don't think anybody saw that coming.
No, they're one of the co-sponsors of Team Sky, part of the whole Sky umbrella of companies, Murdoch Empire. And the rumour is a very strong rumour, which may find its way a little more firmly into the public domain in coming days. The rumour is that Bradley Wiggins may well be the figurehead for a development squad that has a kind of. Some kind of link to Team Sky without being part of Team Sky, but it would be a place for young British riders to continue their development, because I think we've seen the talented riders in the Great Britain team. They've been active pretty much every day. Friend of the podcast, Teo Gegenhardt, was off the front and over the barriers.
Literally off the front. He took quite a spectacular dive. I call him Tom Daly today when I saw him. Took quite a spectacular dive in Brighton. It was very lucky. It was the final kilometre. He got the same time as everybody else. Finished 15th overall, which is an outstanding result for a first year senior. Really exceptional performance by him. I think he can be very pleased with that. I spoke to him today, and he agreed he's going to come back on and do a special podcast with us in October. So listen out for that. He's certainly got his head screwed on Teo Gegenhardt, and he's excelled in very strong company this week in a very difficult edition of this race, a race that Bradley Wiggins said some people were saying was the hardest race of the year. So he's done really, really well, save for this slight. I think he was more embarrassed than anything else. He attacked in the final kilometre and misjudged the bend and went flying, literally flying, and hit the barriers. But he was unhurt and he was okay. And he did actually get a little gap there, and he would have stolen a little bit more time. He was also, he said, off the front earlier in the stage, and the TV cameras didn't seem to pick that up at all. I didn't see that. So a great performance from him. And Bradley Wiggins, he's been very relaxed all week actually, and in good form, and obviously pleased to win the time trial, encouraged by what that might mean for the World Championships, where he'll obviously be taking on Tony Martin, Fabian Cancellara, spoke to him after the time trial. The instruction was no questions about his contract. When he was asked about his contract, as the instruction was clearly ignored, a press officer jumped in and said he's not talking about that. He did actually say that he's got some meetings this week coming up on that, but it's quite odd that we were told not to ask any questions about his contract. It suggests that things are quite delicate.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's necessarily that they're quite delicate, but I think there may well be a lot of negotiations. There's a lot of things that need to be worked out. I mean, we know Bradley Wiggins wants to ride Paris-Roubaix again in 2015. He can't do that if he's figurehead of a development squad of mainly young riders. So there was going to.
He wants to do under 23 Paris-Roubaix.
Well, yeah, he'd have to doctor his passport for that. This is just a theory, but he could have a contract with Team Sky up to, say, the end of April, and then switch across to another squad. This would all have to be ironed out with the UCI, all very much up in the air at the moment. But when we mentioned this on the podcast last week, a few people were sceptical, understandably so, because this would be quite a departure for Bradley Wiggins to take this kind of move. But the more you think about it, the more it could make sense. He's going back to the track. He's going to ride the Track World Cup in London in December. This week, Jens Voigt is having a go at the world hour record. We could sort of speculate that a move to a team backed by 21st Century Fox and an attack on the hour record, which Jens Voigt would, if he breaks it, he's going to set a meaningful benchmark, which other professional riders could target. And then you could conceivably say Bradley Wiggins' 2015 season could be built around an attack on the hour record and a documentary film to go with it, and then that leads perfectly into 2016 and Rio. So it feels to me like the pieces of the jigsaw are starting to fall into place.
I mean, there's been talk for so long about the hour record that you want them to do it before they become 22nd Century Fox, don't you? But anyway. We did speak to Bradley Wiggins after his win in the time trial stage, which moved him up to third place overall, which is where he finished. And before we hear from Bradley Wiggins, just a little pat on the back for myself. You mentioned scepticism there, Lionel, at your scoop last week about this rumour that Wiggins will head up the development team. Just a little pat on the back for myself. I did say that a Garmin-Sharp rider would win the Tour of Britain. I did call that. Okay, it was Jack Bauer. I said we'd win it, but let's not be too picky here. The rider who won it is our Garmin-Sharp rider. Very similar kind of build to Jack Bauer.
As we heard from Charlie, it was Dylan van Baarle and Jack Bauer were their protected riders this week.
Could have been Jack Bauer. It could easily have been Jack Bauer, and I would have been 100% right as opposed to 80% right. Anyway, let's hear from Bradley Wiggins. Here he is talking about his win in the time trial and a little bit about the hour record as well.
Yeah, I sort of felt like I was lacking a little bit at the start of the week, just in intensity, race days. But I think as the race has gone on, I'm fatigued. I haven't sort of gone downhill. I feel like I've got better every day, and I'm sort of coping with the intensity a bit better every day. So I was sort of fit for one thing coming here, with only sort of 34 days racing this year. So I feel like to be here now a week on in third place, just 20 odd seconds off, I'm pretty pleased with that.
You said a week ago this might be the last time you leave the team into a stage race. Do you stand by that?
I think so, yeah. I think it's easy to sort of think, well, I'd love to have another crack next year, but then I have to kind of start thinking bigger picture rather than just short term. And this winter, and if I'm serious about Rio, which I am, it's easy to get roped in when you come to things like this, and I think there has to be a point where I kind of make that switch, and with the winter months ahead now, it's kind of I have time to go and change body shape and things like that. And it's coming up to the best part, nearly 18 months now from the Olympics, so that's going to have to start soon if we're going to do it. So I think so for GC, unless things like Qatar and that, which I don't even think we're doing next year, anything with the climbing, really, I think this will be the last GC.
And will you be watching Jens Voigt's hour record attempt?
No, we're just talking about it on the bus, so it's. I think it's good for the sport that someone's doing it. It's probably going to take someone a bit wacky to get up and go through that, and I think for him, it's just. I think he's going to get the record, in current setup, and I think it's the first marker for the rest of us to follow, really. So I think it's good, really, and in a way, it's kind of for him. It's good of him to do that as his last thing, really. So,
final question about we haven't seen the last of you on the road. You've obviously rode well at Paris-Roubaix this year. Is that
I'll be back at Paris-Roubaix next year. Yeah, definitely. And I think the kind of stuff I'm going to be doing for the track ties in with the demands of that event. So it kind of kills two birds with one stone with that, definitely.
Any other classics?
Probably do Flanders again, and Depanas and all the usual build-up. So, yeah.
So we heard there from Bradley Wiggins, and I think this has been a packed podcast, Lionel. We're going to have to leave our thrilling Tour of Britain roundup there. Listen out, as I said earlier, in the next few days for a Tour of Spain special. But that's all from me, Richard Moore. Thank you very much, Lionel.
Thank you, Richard.
The Telegraph Cycling Podcast. Subscribe on iTunes, listen on Audioboo, visit us at thecyclingpodcast.com.